So now that we've started, I'd like to ask you to humor me in an exercise. So the idea is that I'm curious if we could reframe this shot for how you would frame this interaction if this was a scene in a movie that you were making. And the dynamic of the scene is I'm coming to you and I'm a neophyte and you're the master and I'm trying to learn your secrets.
And it's one shot.
It's one frame, yeah.
Could you bring the camera around behind me?
So can you tell me a little bit about how you came up with this frame?
Yeah, I don't know. So you look at a room, or your dynamic that you proposed, and then thought, well, if it's gonna be about, there's one way to look at it, whereas if it's about me, then it should be a close-up of me, and it could have been like a low-angle shot. But then if it was gonna be one shot, and I thought, well, then maybe it made more sense for me to be more obscured in the dynamic that you were setting than for me to be foreground in the way that the sort of like teacher role would be. And the other way, even the other way I could have shot would be to obscure you more and go from behind you. But also I thought that and also in terms of the dynamic that you were setting up, if you look at the dynamic from the perspective of the person being interviewed, this then automatically shifts the perspective to one that you don't often see in an interview, which would be more on the interviewer than the interviewee. So all those things, I guess, went through my head, and then because of the position of the camera, I can be less or more in view because I'm in the swivel chair. You're stuck there. And then the thing in the fridge was just felt distracting. So this is a little cleaner, I think.
I wonder if this frame is about desire in a certain way, because as the master, you're what both this character and the viewer is interested in. And so you're withholding what we desire, which is to see, and by seeing, understand to a certain way.
Yeah.
The master. So this frame is about withholding, right?
Yeah, I think that it's a lot of the things that I do is actually, I think it's just sort of obscuring what the focus of the scene is, or putting obstructing the view of what the scene's about. So you have to sort of find that thing you're supposed to be looking at. Like, I really like the idea of seeing the face of your main character in a specific way at the very end, and I did that with Robert and did that with Simon, because seeing their face up front doesn't it's nothing
right.
But by the end of that picture, you're looking at that face in a totally different way, and that's when you're really looking at that face for the first time.
So it sounds like to a certain extent what you're talking about is the eye, the camera, is a way of determining how you feel about someone that's sort of analogous to what's going through your head as you're getting to know someone in your life, right? Like as you're spending more time with someone, you're thinking X, Y, Z. The camera for you is a physical manifestation of how you respond to someone emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then that makes me think about something that is referenced a lot in the film, which is the connection between the eye and the brain.
I guess it's weird because I'm so conscious of filmmaking, and in some ways I need to know how my character sees the world in order to figure them out enough to make the movie. And if I have a way in, like with Robert with the videos, or with Simon with the eye and the brain, this thing that he studied, this interest in the way that what we see and how we the way that what we see connects to the way that we process it, or how it doesn't connect was something that made sense to me. And someone who's interested in the peripheral made sense to me. Sort of things that are lurking on the edges of the frame, and not right in your face.
In your mind, what is a shot when it works?
I mean, the first thing for me to start off doing a shot is if I don't have an actor that I'm working against, who I can sort of sense, whose emotions I can sense, or presence I can feel, then it becomes really hard for me to frame a shot. And then if there's nothing in the frame, I tend to try and make the camera seem conscious in a way, and that usually involves movement and stopping and things like that. And usually a slow pan tends to do it for me. And so for me, it's like you see the shot, or I have an idea of a shot or how I'm looking at the character, and then that sort of abstract idea I pass on to the cinematographer, and in this case it's Joe, and I trust Joe implicitly, and so he finds something, and then I start seeing it, and then the abstract idea becomes a little more solid, and then by me touching the camera or seeing where the actors end up, then it becomes something that is probably better than my abstract idea. Or, I land on something that feels like what I was originally thinking when it may not have been, but feels right in the moment. So yeah, the right shot, you can only sort of tell in the moment when you're there.
So you're talking about a shot as being something that comes up against the emotions that are coming from this actor, and the shot can only be right if it's capturing the emotion in the right way. So do you have some sense of the performance in your head before you start shooting so that you can plan the shot out in advance, or are you changing the shot depending on what you get from the performance in the moment?
No, I have an idea of what the performance is in my head.
Okay.
And that's partially because I can figure out. Yeah, it's partially because I have that in my head as I'm developing it, and also because I think I understand. Hopefully, it's because I understand the actor.
What do you do if you're not getting the emotions from an actor that you have expected, that you've seen in your head while you were setting up the shot?
I mean, what do? You just keep going. I mean, or you rethink the scene.
That's what I was wondering. I'm wondering if maybe you have a way of just reshooting it so that if maybe the performance wasn't what you wanted for the first shot, but maybe you find a shot that suits this performance.
Yeah. I do that sometimes. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that because in order for me to explain that, then I would have to explain the shots where I didn't think the performance was good.
Yeah, no, I'm not asking.
But yeah, there are shots where I'm like, this isn't working. Let me make this more interesting, or let me obscure the things that aren't working about this scene, and make it more interesting in that way. So yes, it's an active process. So if I can't get what I want, yeah, I'll be creative about it. You decide as you're doing shots whether your camera is one step ahead or behind of your character. And is your camera motivating things, or is your performer motivating things? And if your performer's motivating things, you can still look at it like the camera is following. And if the camera is one step ahead, that's also interesting too. I mean, and in that shot, where we've decided to follow Victoria, and we're saying Victoria is now in this picture, and I'm thinking, I want to sort of catch her. I want her to guide me through this space. This is her space, so she's going to guide me through this space, and Simon's going to sit. So he's going to disappear, which is interesting because then where does, you subconsciously you're thinking, what am I looking at? So Victoria's there, where is Simon? And then you find Simon, but we're brought back to Simon through Victoria. So where was that? 20.
Oh, yeah, this is interesting. It's starts right here. Okay, well, let me know when you guys are good.
All right.
Okay, go ahead and roll.
No.
Okay, so this is a really interesting move because this is one of those conscious camera sort of moments because neither of them can obviously see this. This is something that's the camera, they start talking about her friend and then the camera moves as they talk about it, even though this perspective isn't available to either of them. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how that move came to be, and if you feel like that's an example of the sort of camera consciousness you were talking about before.
Yeah, that is. I mean, this is a move where you wanted to get a sense of her world, and she's talking about her,
right?
And though it is outside their world, it's also directly referred to by their conversation. So it's a moment where where we drift away from her, and so it is a way into her without being on her. It's almost like the camera knows here what she's talking about, and so that's where we're going with the camera, and then we're coming back when she's moving on from that. And I think when we come back to this moment here, there's a similar thing going on, two stories going on here, and the camera knowing where Simon's going to end up, and Simon's controlling.
Right, the camera was ready for that.
Yes, the camera knows that he's going to go there, and that's Simon's world. So it's like, I think it's all about who's the scene's about and where they're taking us, and the camera sort of having the hunch of where that is.
So I wanted to ask you about synecdoche, which is something that happens in the film a couple times, and this is one example of. There we go. This is one example of it here, because this is an interesting example of a shot where, to me, it's about showing a part of a thing, and only seeing the part of the thing in some way becomes a truer representation of the thing than seeing the whole thing itself.
Okay. Well, you also I'm always thinking about the way that I'm going to frame up the next thing. So I'm thinking about this scene, and I'm also thinking about the way that I'm going to frame this. And I'm thinking that I'm always going to frame her from more frontal and head on, I'm going to frame Victoria more obscured and focused and sort of decapitate her and make her more better, and objectify her more in a way. And so there's in like, you know, I'm thinking about the nightclub scene. I'm also thinking about the brothel scene. I'm also thinking about the nightclub scene, and you know, when he shows up here to talk to her, it's also, you know, that scene is obstructed. And when he shows up back here, it's not. You know,
Right.
and so there's always just, and also, you know, when I'm thinking about a following shot here, I know that eventually we'll find purpose in the following when we get to the point where he's actually following someone.
Right.
So, you know, there's always something, you know, and also I'm thinking about, you know, the shots on of the table. I'm thinking about the next shot on the table, which is the next day, and what does that say about what they've done? And in these shots, there's like, the idea is always that there is always something to hold on to. There's always a story being told. I mean, there's history in this table here, and there's something about this movement that, like, and I do have the headshot of them, and we did cover that in this situation. We didn't always do that, but in this one I was trying to still figure it out. But I knew that here, her body, and then, you know, in choosing this dress, this sort of slinky-like dress that accentuated her movement, and this told the story more than having to cut back and forth, and this kind of strange gestures and touches, and her pushing him away but bringing him close, and then here again, here's a camera telling us, okay, this is where this is gonna go.
Right.
Where this is like, this is not what this movie's about. This is where we're going next.
Right.
We're going back to that little seed that he's planted, and so there's all these things that are going on in my mind, my cameraman's mind, and also that, you know, these things aren't. What's interesting about it is you kind of set up a chaotic scene. We didn't necessarily know how they were going to move, but we had figured out enough of our approach that whatever they did do, we'd be prepared for. And once you start doing enough takes of it, it finds a rhythm of its own, and then you're in sync enough with them that that it's just, in my opinion, the right amount of perfect and sloppy, and that's what I'm interested in, is trying to, because even after school, a lot of times I wouldn't give marks. Like, I'd say, okay, you guys are here, and they wouldn't necessarily know when they were on in the frame or not. When we set it up, they were, but once they started moving around in the scene and feeling things out, they were on edge, they were off, they were on. It was like you set up a really nice frame, and then you just let the actors give it some life,
right,
and mess it up. And so that's one of the things I'm interested in, is how do you you set up enough of the pieces that the things that are by chance or spontaneous can play out and still look interesting and good. And so that's one of the things that happens in a shot like this.
So that's really interesting. So I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit more about that and the way that you go about setting up the shot so that it can be, because I mean, let's be honest, like these shots, some of them are highly, highly composed. Like it's very, very careful how the camera's moving and what you're doing. So can you talk a little bit more about the way in which you're able to maintain that level of control over the visuals while allowing for that degree of improvisation?
It's simple. It's not complicated, but it's, you know, if you set up your parameters, which is for each shot, you know, okay, well, the camera's going to be one position, focus can rack, we'll keep everything on the same axis, so we don't have to move it around. Then you're designing something, but you are also allowing an actor to live something out. So yeah, it's very composed, but at the same time, there's a certain amount of freedom I'm giving the actor to move, and yeah, there's marks and things like that, but an actor should be able to just get to a rough place that fits so that he's in focus. And so you know you're choreographing, you're building the scene to be, you're designing the scene, but you're also giving someone the freedom to live it in that scene. So, you know, if I was saying this is a close up shot and we're gonna have like 8 lights right next to you and you can't really get up, but this is what you gotta do, then he's gonna have to do the scene. Then we're gonna have to break the scene apart, and I'll have to do a shot of the suitcase, and I'll have to, you know, I'll have to do a master and set him up there, and I can see him walk up and down in the master, and then he picks up the suitcase, and we can go look at the suitcase, we can go on the other. But at the same time, it's like this is all he's the one telling me the story. Like he's the one that's guiding me through this thing. So why don't I just frame it up around him? Let him dictate the decision that I make in terms of what the camera's going to be. And also, you know, I'm always trying to think of things economically, so I'm always trying to think of the one shot that tells the story,
right,
as opposed to the series of shots that tell the story.
This is a really fantastic shot
Mm-hmm.
when they're in the cafe
Mm-hmm.
on this sort of pseudo date. I guess it is kind of a date.
But it tells the story, you know. I mean, because her face was all I was really interested in, and we had this.
So we've got this going on.
Oh yeah,
here.
well he has to be there, and we played with different ideas of are we going from him or is he sitting where she is, and but no, it's about her, and God, she's beautiful, and the light was just perfect that day, and we framed it up by the window, and you know, whenever you have a fucking mirror in a scene, God bless you. There's so much you can do with it. It's just you know, again, it's like, what is this? How do we? What's the scene about? And what's the most economic way? And what's that one image that will hold you? And I knew this like that day. I told her, I said, what I'd like to do in this scene, if you're okay with it, is talk about your eyes. She said, it's okay, don't worry about it. And I said, you know, he's gonna sort of question you, not interrogate you, but question you about what this is, where it comes from, and so this was the way to do that, and you know, seeing him but not seeing him obstructed, seeing the way she's reacting to him is much more important in this shot than the way he's reacting to her. And you know him at this point, so that's not what it's about. It's her.
I think this is one of the most well-composed frames in the film. And I was just wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about how you relate to the geometry of the frame.
I mean, here, there's again, let's start off with what I like. So I like if this is a sexual scene, that this is where we're going to start. And, you know, and there's something immediately... I mean, you know what this shot's about. He wants to fuck. And I like frames and frames. And we had this great perspective down the hall here. And there she is, she goes and takes a piss, and he's still getting all riled up and waiting for her to come out. And he's hiding behind the corner here. And so we can get lost in that. And we're holding on to just a sliver of her here. And
that's what we want to see.
Yeah, and that's what we want to see, exactly. And then she comes in here, and you know, and then in terms of setup, we have some things that they can play with. I mean, we have this door that gives us a nice little beat in terms of something sort of yeah, exactly, something like that. Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, and then we stay here. I like when a shot becomes two very different things, because this shot is very much one thing, and then this shot, all of a sudden in the same shot, we're seeing him very clearly and in the light.
Right.
And then,
this is who he is.
Yeah,
now.
and now she's put him into this submissive position that she's been in.
This may seem a little silly, but I feel like you do this a decent amount. This,
Mm-hmm.
the back of this chair,
Mm-hmm.
there's something, I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something about the back of this chair that it, like, makes the frame really dynamic for me. Like if that isn't there, I mean, I know that, it's important to have things in the foreground, and I guess there's just, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but there's
it's just when you do things like that, because you're looking at a shot and you're like, okay, so he's going to come here, and then sometimes that chair, like let's say that chair, sometimes that chair is just there, and you're shooting, and it's happy accident that's there, and that's going to make the scene. It's going to make the shot more interesting because of the fact that it's not going to feel like, again, you don't know what this shot's about completely. You're still figuring it out. And the more obstructions you put in there, the more real it feels. And also the more that you're still like trying to put this puzzle together of what this is. And then in its own way, this kind of thing brings you further into it. This is our drawing our eye this way. So, yeah, I think that, if the chair's not there, you're trying to figure out how to, you know what I mean? Like,
you don't have a way in.
If the chair wasn't there, I'd probably be looking at the shot for like 20 minutes and being like, something's missing. And I wouldn't know what it is.
Right.
So like sometimes sometimes the chair is there already. You know what I mean?
Right. And it's interesting, you said if there's more obstructions, it feels more real. And then it seems like you tend to cut once the obstructions are gone and we figured out what, because you were saying at the beginning we're trying to figure out what the scene is. That seems to be the structure of a lot of this film. It's about you're trying to figure out what the frame is about, why it's framed this way, and then by the time you figure out why the frame is what it is, the scene ends.
Yeah.
That is something that I was going to initially wrap up about, but since we're on the topic, we might as well talk about it now, which is that, so there's this thing that you do a lot in Simon Killer, which is the audience wants to see X, so you obscure X. That happens. That's one of the formal rules of the film almost every single shot, what we want to see is being either partially or entirely obscured. And from a immediately engagement sort of based viewpoint, it makes sense, because if the audience wants to see X and you're withholding X, you're keeping someone's interest because they're going to keep watching. And what I was originally, when I was coming up with that question, what I was originally going to ask you was, is there a deeper reason to obscure X? Are we obscuring X solely for the sake of engaging the audience, or is there a sort of deeper philosophical meaning to the why X is obscured? And there may be, and if that's something that you think is interesting, we can talk about that. But as I was coming up with that question, I sort of hit on something, or I realized something that made a lot of sense, which was that it made me think about desire and the fact that being human, I think, is being in a constant desiring state. It makes me think about what Lacan talked about, the famous adage that desire seeks desire, right? Desire can never be sated. Desire can never be satisfied. So if we desire X and then we're given X, we don't want X anymore. So in that sense, your formal setup for Simon Killer, which is you want X, well, I'm not going to give you X, and that's going to happen for the whole movie. Your formal setup is sort of analogous to a certain part of what it means to be human, which is you're constantly seeking something and you're never getting it. And the experience of wanting something that you're never going to get is something that we're sort of innately living with.